The email came at 9:04 a.m. Subject termination: on the same morning, I brought donuts to celebrate my 25th work anniversary. Name's Ray 58, warehouse floor manager, or at least I was. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I turned my old brass badge in the one my son once called a loser's trophy. Ever been mocked by your own kid, then handed the keys to his future? The smell of lemon oil still clung to my fingertips as I adjusted the old silver microphone in its blue felt cradle. I had spent the better part of an hour polishing it that morning, rubbing gently around the etchings at the base, careful not to buff away the small nick from where I dropped it at that chaotic reception in '99. It was gleaming now, brighter than it had been in years, and I was certain it would speak for me in a way I hadn't quite found the words to. Dad, I love you, but your speeches are always kind of rigid. We're keeping it light this time, okay? Elodie stood across the kitchen island, twisting her hair up into a clip, already dressed in wedding planning mode, soft cardigan planner, open eyes darting between color swatches and table layouts. I gave a chuckle light, but delayed, hoping she'd read it as amused. I held up the microphone in its case like a sacred offering. This old thing thought it might lend some charm. It saved a wedding once, you know. The DJ vanished. I stepped in, played music off a laptop, gave impromptu intros. People thought it was planned. She reached for a piece of toast instead. We already have lapel mics. It's just cleaner. Sound guys said they're better for outdoor venues. Sure, I said. Cleaner? That her fiancé wandered in and kissed her cheek like clockwork. What's for breakfast? He gave me a smile, untroubled. Hey, Boaz, that mic looks vintage. It is, I replied. Came from Larkspur Inn back when I was managing events there. He nodded absently, already fishing through the fridge. I watched Elodie scribble something on a sticky note and place it beside the centerpiece diagram. My name wasn't on it. Neither was any mention of a toast from the father of the bride. We moved to the living room for the planning session. I sat on the edge of the armchair, pretending to study the guest list, while they debated aisle runners. Elodie asked if her mother had RSVP'd. I hadn't heard from Leanne since Thanksgiving. I figured you might want to say something at the rehearsal dinner, Elodie offered later, glancing at her phone. Something short, like 5 minutes. I'll write something, I said, though my throat felt thick. Keep it light. Back in the kitchen, I folded the microphone into its cloth wrap. The lemon oil had faded, now replaced by something dustier, older. The wooden drawer stuck as I slid it shut, then caught, then thunked into place. Her words stayed behind like a draft that wouldn't seal. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fan wobbled on its axis blades, catching light from the street lamp outside. I rose around 2:00 a.m., patted across the floor in my socks, and dug out a worn manila folder from the hallway cabinet. Inside, my old speeches, typed, dated, annotated with red ink. I flipped past the retirement one, past the town hall introduction for the mayor, and stopped at the eulogy I gave for my Uncle Paul. Behind it, creased and faintly yellowing, was the one I gave at Jerry and Monica's wedding in '96. The ink had smudged slightly in the July heat that day. I remembered my palms sweating. The first line read, "Marriage is the art of echo, each partner choosing which notes to carry forward." I mouthed the sentence softly, like a prayer or an audition. The words still felt true. I had believed them then. I believed them now. A creak from the hallway. I froze, folder in hand, but it was just the floorboard settling. I returned to bed with the speech folded inside a book of Frost poems I kept in the drawer. I didn't know if I'd get to say it, but I wanted it close. Some things aren't polished for display. They're kept because they held when nothing else did. The next morning, I found myself alone in the kitchen again. The air was still the only sound, the hum of the old refrigerator I'd been meaning to replace. I opened the drawer just to look at the microphone again. The cloth wrap felt cool, soft in my hands. I remembered the first time I'd used it long before Elodie was born. A wedding by the lake. The couple had tears in their eyes when I handed them the mic for their vows. I wasn't even the officiant. I was just the guy with a steady hand and a voice that carried. I leaned on the counter, staring at the worn etch in the base, LK15, the serial number barely visible. It wasn't just a mic. It was the one thing that stayed with me from the old life, when people waited for me to speak before they raised a glass. Now even my daughter looked through me when she held her clipboard. There was a time she'd sit on my lap after weddings tangled in ribbon and sleepy-eyed, asking if I could make my voice big like I did for the guests. I'd pretend the soup ladle was a mic and deliver bedtime stories with Shakespearean gravitas. And so the brave little raccoon ventured forth. She would giggle until she couldn't keep her eyes open. But time is an eraser, slow and polite. It doesn't announce which memories it's taking. One day you look up and your place at the table is gone, replaced by an RSVP code and a silent nod. I shook the thoughts from my head. There was still time. The rehearsal dinner, 5 minutes. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe I was fooling myself thinking I had something left to say that mattered. I made a pot of coffee, poured it into the chipped blue mug Elodie gave me on Father's Day when she was 12. World's okayest dad. It read in flaking white letters. I ran my thumb across the faded print. Outside, the rain had started soft at first, then steadier, the kind that makes you think of old regrets of things said too late or not at all. I pulled out the speech again, read the second paragraph twice. It wasn't just about weddings, it was about being heard, about not fading. The drawer stuck again when I opened it. I didn't force it. I let it be. Some things don't want to be shut away too easily. I left the mic on the counter this time, just in case. Larkspur used to call me the voice that calmed the mother of every bride. Until one memo rewrote that. I had just finished my morning coffee, a little too bitter, a little too cold. The cup left a faint ring on an unopened envelope I'd been dodging for 4 years. It was still sealed, cream-colored, thick, with that kind of formality they use when they want you to feel honored even when they've forgotten your name. In navy ink, it read Honorary Host Nomination, 2019. The corner was stained with old coffee like a memory. Someone tried to sip, then set aside. It had arrived 2 weeks before they called me in. I remember the scent of lavender oil in the hallway. Larkspur Inn liked to keep things soothing. They said it helped with bridezillas. I passed the front desk where Lucinda was arranging macarons by color, her version of diplomacy. I was holding a clipboard wearing my pressed navy blazer and humming something from Sinatra when I walked into the HR office. Darren, the HR guy, was all soft-spoken tones and uncomfortable silences. He slid a folder toward me like it was radioactive. "We're restructuring," he said. "New blood, new energy. You've had a good run." I smiled like I didn't just get stabbed with a butter knife. "So I'm being retired. We'd prefer the term transitioned out." He gestured vaguely toward the future like I had one lined up. What I wanted to say was, "You've had me work 15-hour weekends calm." 4 mothers who cried over centerpiece height and trained 6 managers who never thanked me. What I said instead was, "Right." I kept nodding until he handed me the packet. My name was typed wrong on the cover, Boaz instead of Boaz. That stung more than I expected. The packet offered a small severance and a pre-written farewell email. I left the office with my clipboard and pride intact, but I didn't return to pack my things. I let them mail it. Elodie never knew. She was starting grad school then, and I didn't want to add failure to her syllabus. So I told her I took early retirement, a sabbatical, a long overdue break. I told myself it wasn't a lie if it came from love. Back in the present, I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor of my garage, sorting through old event bins. Dust curled up in little ghosts when I opened the blue crate marked 2019 final. Inside was the clipboard, the one I'd held that day. The back still had the scribbled speech for the Jefferson Reed reception speak, slow glance at mother, pause before toast. My writing looping and neat. It felt like running into an old friend who'd forgotten your birthday. I found a pressed boutonniere crumbled and dry. A sticky note, order mints. Mother of groom hates gum. I smiled at that. I used to remember things like that. Then near the bottom was the Larkspur anniversary program. My eyes flicked through the photos, group shots, hugs, laughter. I counted faces. I found the one where I should have been. The room, the decor, even my clipboard were in the frame, but I was cropped out. Clean. I closed the booklet and placed it face down. I didn't realize my hands had balled into fists until the paper crinkled. I let go. The silence in the garage was a thick thing like dust that hadn't settled. I got up slowly, knees protesting. Walked over to the metal shelf where I kept old tools and legal papers. Opened my laptop. The The screen lit up with the default photo Elodie in second grade, missing a front tooth, grinning like the world had no edge. I clicked compose. To Finch Reynolds, subject lease language question, Finch. Need a quick look at something from 2019. Remember that contract from the Larkspur lease renewal? Have a question. Boaz. I hit send. The cursor blinked then stilled. The unopened envelope from earlier still sat on the table. I picked it up, finally tore it open. In the on was a certificate, in honor of your years of calming chaos, guiding brides, and keeping grooms from fleeing. There was a line that read, "You will always be a part of our story." I let out a soft laugh. They had already changed the ending. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't need the certificate. I just wanted to be remembered whole. I remember the day you stopped a whole wedding with one gesture, Hoxie said, stepping onto the old church steps. The sun caught his white hair and made it glow like he was lit from within. He had that same pine sap smell from years ago. The scent of old pews and floors scrubbed with cedar oil. Cletus's dog ambled up behind him, tail brushing against the wild clover growing through the stone cracks. I looked at the chapel whisper hall, as the old sign said. Though half the letters had peeled, it was the kind of place birds now used more than humans. The front doors creaked open with effort, like the building was waking from a long nap. Didn't know you still came out here, I said. Hoxie smiled, tapping his cane against the threshold. Some things deserve company even after they're forgotten. Inside, dust moved in swirls, catching the light like ash in morning sun. Rows of wooden pews sagged with age. The hymn boards had broken numbers, still hanging rusted nails, jutting out like punctuation marks, left behind in a rushed sentence. He motioned to the bench closest to the pulpit. Still remember that wedding, the mute bride? I nodded. I hadn't thought of her in years. She couldn't speak, but her eyes did. I'd offered to toast, but then saw how still she was, like a candle's flame refusing wind. So I raised the silver mic, tapped it once, and set it back down. The room had gone silent. A kind of reverence. Then everyone followed suit one by one, toasting with silence. That's what made you unforgettable, Hoxie said, settling onto the bench beside me. Not your speeches, your listening. I took a cloth from my pocket and brushed dust from the armrest. Feels like lifetimes ago. You've been hiding, Bo. I don't say it to shame you, I say it because even Cletus noticed. He used to jump when your voice hit the radio waves. Now he just sleeps. The dog thumped his tail in faint agreement. I said nothing for a while, just kept wiping dust, watching it trail into the air like ghost ribbon. The quiet and whisper hall had weight, but it wasn't heavy. It felt earned. I'm not sure I know how to host anymore, I finally said. Hoxie reached into his canvas bag and pulled something wrapped in a handkerchief. You forgot, he said, placing it in my palm, that the mic never hosted without you. I unfolded it, my silver mic. It still smelled faintly of lemon oil and something older time. You found it, rescued it, he said. Someone tried to donate it to a prop warehouse. I bought it back for $12 and a piece of pie, he chuckled. It did still feel right in my hand, like it knew me, like my thumb remembered where to press, how to pause before saying something that mattered. I don't know what to do with it anymore, I whispered. Hoxie's gaze sharpened, not scolding, just steady. Maybe it's not about doing. Maybe it's just time to be present. He stood slowly, joints clicking like old floorboards. Reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Thought about holding this a while longer, but now seems better. I took it. No label, just soft from age. Inside was a folded deed, the name stamped at the top, Whisper Hall. What is this? I asked, voice low. It's yours. Always was in spirit, but now on paper too. I opened my mouth to protest. He raised a hand. I'm tired, Bo, and I know you. You won't turn this into a circus. You'll know what to do when someone walks in broken. I stepped out onto the porch again, the envelope tucked under my arm. The air was warm with May's quiet hum. Distant insects, the breeze brushing chimes somewhere unseen. Across the threshold, the chapel door bore a brass plate I'd never noticed before. Silent toasts begin here. I traced the letters with my fingertip. Cletus sneezed. Hoxie just smiled. Elodie and Thad 2023 blinked across 3 oversized monitors like neon commandments. I stood quietly near the snack table watching my old silver mic peeking out from behind a bin of LED uplighting cables. The grill dulled under a slick of dust. A production assistant glanced over. "Are you someone's +1 or—" It was rehearsal day at Larkspur Pavilion, but it might as well have been opening night on a tech startup's IPO launch. Plastic champagne flutes stacked in pyramids, floral arrangements still boxed in water, and a small team of interns darting like ants attaching QR codes to every table card. Everything glittered, pulse streamed. I made my way through the rows of white folding chairs and toward the operations binder laid out at the central AV table. Printed schedules color-coded. Welcome toasts at 6:45 p.m., followed by Mother of the Groom. Remarks. Best man. Banter, TikTok, montage, dance floor, activation. I scanned the names. No mention of me. I caught sight of my name tag, Mr. K Dry Erase Ink, smudged at the edges. Even that felt borrowed. Elodie said you were bringing the old mic. Thad's voice carried the weightless cheer of someone trained to diffuse gently. We're trying to keep things streamlined. Clean audio lines, social-friendly formats. You know. He pointed to a thin black lapel mic with a wireless clip. She's got it covered. I followed his finger to the mic she would wear, sleek, efficient, invisible. The old me might have cracked a joke, might have patted his shoulder, made a reference to Sinatra or wedding cake disasters. But this me, I simply nodded. Makes sense. The silver mic had a short cable, not nearly enough to trip anyone, but long enough to carry weight. I picked it up, coiled it like I had 1,000 times before, and tucked it back into its velvet pouch. The lemon oil scent I had used days earlier had faded. It now smelled faintly of the pretzels stacked beside it. A social media intern passed by with a gimbal. Could you step out of frame real quick? We're doing a rehearsal reel for the venue's Insta. Of course, I said. They didn't notice when I slipped away. In the parking lot, my car's interior was oven warm. I turned the AC dial, then stopped. The silver mic lay on the passenger seat, the velvet pouch half unzipped, like a mouth wanting to speak. I didn't touch it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Finch's name. Tap. Ring. Bo, he answered quickly, as if he knew the weight behind my silence. That quick enough. How fast can we move on a conditional purchase, I asked. For Whisper Hall, something older, something not built for hashtags. He paused. All right, I'll pull the files. I leaned back in my seat and stared at my own reflection in the windshield. The venue shimmered behind me, full of potential and algorithms. I didn't feel old exactly, I felt archived. The mic didn't make a sound, but for the first time in years, I realized I didn't need one to speak. Under Section 4B of the standing lease, I now reserve full programming rights for June 3rd, 2023. The words tasted both foreign and familiar as they left my mouth bouncing gently off the paneled walls of Finch's office, like the final note of a song no one expected to hear again. I looked down at the contract, then at Finch, who was already flipping the second page with the ease of a man who'd brokered more divorces than weddings. Funny how loyalty outlives relevance, Finch muttered, tapping the page, where my old signature rested faint but still legible beneath the watermark. This signature here, it may not have gotten you a toast slot, but it just bought you something better. Rain patted the window like nervous fingers. Finch's office had always smelled faintly of varnish and tax season. Books on trust law and tenancy rights lined the walls, their gold lettering dulled by dust. Outside, the streetlights blurred in the downpour, but in here, everything had edges. I ran my thumb along the edge of the check I'd written life insurance money from when Mara passed. I hadn't touched it. Not for the roof, not for travel, not even when Elodie needed help with her first apartment's deposit. I always said it was for something sacred. Apparently this counted. I called Carla, Finch said, pulling a thin envelope from his breast pocket. Told her what you had in mind. She said Boaz from the wake. Then she cried for 10 seconds and said yes. I blinked. She remembers Mara's service. She remembers your toast. So do I, actually. Quietest room I'd ever sat in. Finch's eyes softened behind his glasses. You deserved more than a corner seat and a plastic flute. The desk between us creaked as he slid the document over. New deed. Larkspur Pavilion returns to your care for 24 hours. I traced my name etched above the ownership line. It felt like signing a marriage certificate backward. Not joining, but reclaiming. Not for control, but to replant my voice where it once mattered. Clause 4B Finch repeated, tapping the second sheet, states the current owner has final say on any public event programming that takes place during their tenure if the event involves ceremonial speech, public blessing, or ritual exchange. I didn't need to hear more. I signed. The pen wobbled slightly in my grip, but I steadied it. Mara always said I had a hand like a metronome. I finished the stroke, blotted the corner where the ink puddled just slightly, and nodded. Finch stood, extended his hand. Congratulations, Mr. Host. For one day, the mic is yours again. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the draft I'd been revising for weeks, and clicked send. The email subject read simply, Event Structure Revision, June 3rd, no signature block, just Dad. Ladies and gentlemen, today's schedule will be slightly different. That single sentence, spoken into a quiet that hadn't yet expected interruption, hung like a thread waiting to be pulled. I adjusted my collar, not out of nerves, but out of habit, the same way I'd adjusted it before every announcement at Larkspur Inn. Only this time, I wasn't backed by staff. No lights warmed me from above. There was just the hum of a champagne fridge and a wall of pale lavender arrangements lined like sentries. The tie I wore was navy, lightly frayed at the tip. Mara's favorite. She'd said once, it smells like eucalyptus, and regret. I had no idea what that meant back then. Now I did. The silver microphone sat center stage, its cord coiled neatly like a resting spine. Not plugged in. Not needed. It gleamed with purpose, not utility. I had polished it again that morning just as I did before every important day. I stepped up slowly, letting the hush roll toward me like a tide. Rows of eyes followed, some confused, some concerned. Elodie sat toward the front, bouquet in her lap, back straight. Thad had one arm around her chair, another checking his watch. Their friends, the vendors, the influencer, who looked mildly annoyed at the shift in sequence, all were in place. I reached the mic, touched its head like an old friend. Then I turned to the audience. No script, no toast. I held the mic up just once, let the weight settle. And then instead of speaking, I lowered it slowly, carefully, and placed it down on the table. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it wasn't expectant. It was reverent, as though the very air understood this was not a mistake. This was not forgetfulness, this was intentional. Somewhere in the back a phone vibrated. No one answered. I bowed. Not the grand kind of bow you give when you crave ovation. This one was small, quiet. The kind you give when the gesture must say everything words would ruin. Behind me the slideshow flickered and then froze. The last frame, Mara, laughing, her head thrown back like she'd heard the punchline of life and couldn't hold it in. My eyes stayed on Elodie. She hadn't moved, but her hands now clutched the bouquet tighter. Her mouth parted, no words, just breath. Her shoulders sank slightly, and in her eyes was something I hadn't seen since she was 9 years old, and asked, "Did the moon follow us home?" A kind of wonder blended with realization. The moment held. Then came a rustle, just one. A chair slid slightly. A guest stood unsure. Another followed. One clapped, hesitant. Someone sniffed. No one filled the space with noise. No one said, "Well, that was different." They let it be, like a minute of memory that couldn't be narrated. I stepped back, not in shame, not in victory, just finished. I didn't take the mic with me. It remained behind, like a sealed letter never mailed but fully understood. The walk to the exit felt longer than it was, not because the space was big, but because I could feel the moment behind me elongating like a note held past the end of a song. Outside, the wind carried the scent of something burning faintly, someone's cologne maybe, or citronella. The evening light hit the edges of the pavilion, just so, casting the whole structure in gold that would vanish in 10 minutes. I paused near the car, letting my hand brush along the back of an empty chair stacked near the door. Somewhere in the quiet, a bird sang. Not loudly, just enough to thread itself through the stillness like a needle through cloth. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, catching the edge of the microphone's grill one last time. No one stopped me as I left. There was no need. Inside that hall, I had finally spoken not in syllables, but in stillness. And sometimes stillness is the only language love has left. Dad, are you really just going to disappear after that? Her voice came not in anger, not in reproach, but with something quieter, something round-edged like a question that's been sanded smooth by time and uncertainty. I didn't turn around right away. The broom in my hand traced an old arc across the chapel steps, disturbing pine needles that had settled like memory over stone. Cletus barked once from inside the chapel, a low, aged sound. Then, as if he too understood the moment required something softer, he curled back down and sighed. Morning mist coiled between the trees, catching the beams of light that filtered through Whisper Hall's fractured stained glass. I could hear the faint ping of piano keys, some ghost melody playing itself in my head. Or maybe it was just the acoustics of memory bouncing off the rafters and the regrets I hadn't yet cataloged. I leaned the broom against the railing. You found me. Elodie nodded. I asked Hoxie. He said you come here mornings. The fog thickened just briefly, then it parted like a curtain, revealing her fully flats, dusted with gravel hair, pinned back in the same hasty twist her mother used to wear when she needed both hands. She was holding something, a thermos. 2 cups clinking faintly inside. Want tea? We sat on the chapel steps. She handed me the cup. Hers was still steaming. Mine I sipped too early, and it burned just enough to anchor me. No one spoke for 47 seconds. I finally said I didn't mean to make a scene, or a statement. You didn't, she replied. You made a space. The silence held again, not awkward, sacred. Mom would have loved it, she added after a time. I nodded. She did love silence, especially when it came after chaos. Elodie glanced towards the open chapel door. Inside, dust danced like something alive. On the front pew sat a worn velvet case. The mic. She noticed it but didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward, hands around her knees like a child again. I didn't know how to include you, Dad. You were always big, loud in presence, certain. I didn't know how to match that without becoming less of me. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach out. I just listened. And so I chose what was simple, she said. Digital schedules, clean mics, short speeches. I finally spoke, but not no speeches. No, she whispered. Not no speeches. From inside, Cletus shifted. The pews creaked faintly. Mr. Hoxie appeared like he always did, suddenly, without warning, and always with something in hand. Today, it was the folded deed. His coat smelled of pine and thyme. She knows now, he said, eyes on me. You may start over, Boaz. Elodie looked between us, something in her face, opening a hinge that had been rusted shut for years. I stood and led her inside. The case sat unopened. I offered no ceremony. She reached down, undid the clasp, and peeled back the velvet. The silver mic lay still and silent. It's not for performance anymore, I said. It's for grounding. She nodded, running her fingers along its edge. Back on my desk at home, a few hills away, were the papers. Non-profit status pending. The logo, a single microphone sketched in charcoal, surrounded by white space. She would see them soon, not yet. For now, we sat, the tea cooling in our cups, and a whole future beginning in a place where sound once ruled. I didn't need applause anymore, not validation, just room to begin again. And here in the quiet bones of Whisper Hall, I had it. Not because I demanded it, but because silence, when shared, becomes sanctuary. Welcome to the first gathering of the Silent Toast Hall. We begin without introductions. The words were printed, not spoken, on a card placed neatly at the center of each round table. 10 of them filled the hall, circled with chairs, no head, no foot, just space. The walls of Whisper Hall had been scrubbed clean, repainted in soft sand tones. Where the pulpit used to stand, there was now a cluster of potted sage and a cloth banner reading, "Here we hold space." The air held a hint of eucalyptus and lemon oil's old comforts I'd come to lean on. Fall had settled over Beaver Lake, leaves curled in reds and ochres gathering gently on the chapel steps. Inside, though, the warmth came not from season or sunlight, but from presence, from the absence of microphones, from the gentle creak of wood as people sat down and set paper on their laps. I nodded toward Elodie, who stood near the back wearing a charcoal cardigan and an expression I hadn't seen in months, calm, whole. Thad was beside her holding a box of pens, like he wasn't entirely sure what to do with his hands. Each guest had been invited to write a silent toast to someone they had loved or hurt or wished to thank. No names were required, no voices raised, just a few sentences folded once and passed clockwise. A man in his 60s, neatly dressed, sat 2 chairs from me. His hands trembled slightly as he wrote. I'd later learn he was a widowed groom. His partner of 40 years had passed mid-pandemic, without ceremony, without farewells. He hadn't been ready, he'd told Elodie earlier, for words. But today, he brought them in ink. As the notes began to circulate, there was no bell, no signal, just a rhythm paper passed hands. Meeting briefly, eyes reading, then lowering. Some folded the messages again. Others held them for a long time. No one laughed. No one instructed. The sound was all human soft exhales, quiet tears, and the occasional sniffle swallowed into a scarf. Halfway through, the man in the gray jacket stood. His face blotched, but still he held a piece of paper against his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He wept. And no one looked away. A few guests bowed their heads. One woman offered a glass of water with no words. Cletus, curled beneath the table near the window, didn't move. Even the room itself seemed to pause, as if aware that sound in this place was a currency not to be spent lightly. The silver microphone sat in a display case near the entrance, its cord coiled like a resting spine. Next to it, a plaque. For the voices that once went unheard. I had no desire to use it again, not out of pain, but because it had fulfilled its purpose. Its silence now spoke louder than anything I might have said in its place. The workshop continued. More notes passed. A cake sat untouched in the corner, its white frosting beginning to wilt slightly at the edges. I'd forgotten to bring plates. As the guests slowly filtered out some, hugging others, simply placing their notes into a woven basket marked, "Thank you," I returned to the small desk at the rear of the hall. My laptop blinked. One email unread. From Riley Jang, subject. "May I attend your next session?" I smiled. Behind me, Elodie joined at the table, her shoulder touching mine lightly. "We're keeping it going?" she asked. "We are," I said. Outside, the trees rustled in the wind, shedding their leaves in slow spirals. In here, the chairs remained in a circle. No podium, no stage. Just a room rebuilt from quiet, where stories were no longer required to be shouted to be heard. We had created a place where silence wasn't absence. It was invitation. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone, and the windows had been latched shut against the creeping chill, I stood alone in the hall. A few stray notes remained on the table. I gathered them one by one, placing each carefully into a wooden box Mara once used for recipes. Her handwriting was still on a card inside, "Don't overfill the quiche." That quiet domesticity, those little ordinary echoes, felt more profound now than any grand pronouncement. I sat for a moment in the far corner, where sunlight from the stained glass window cast honey-colored patterns on the floor. The bench creaked beneath my weight. My knees ached. But my heart oddly did not. There are kinds of grief that calcify, that settle like dust and make a home inside your breath. But today something had shifted. Not fully lifted, no, but reshaped, rounded, made breathable. When I finally rose, I didn't turn off the lights. I left them low golden the way Elodie said she liked them. A softness you walk into, not one that blinds you. Outside, as I locked the door, I saw our new sign hanging from the archway, simple wood painted in white. The Silent Toast Hall, Estent 2023. No fanfare, no sponsors, just a place for things unspoken to be welcomed at last. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was. A few days later, a handwritten letter arrived, no return address, just a neat print that read, "To Boaz." Inside was a short note. "You gave my father back his dignity. He never spoke at our weddings, but he wrote a silent toast that said everything we needed to hear. Thank you. There was no signature, only a pressed violet inside brittle but whole. I tucked it beside Mara's quiche card, closed the lid, and set the box atop the bookshelf. Outside, the autumn light filtered through pines. I turned toward the chapel, now warm with memory, and thought perhaps legacy isn't what we leave behind in stone, but what we pass forward in quiet. A room without a microphone. And finally, no need to raise my voice. The last light of autumn spilled across the floorboards, brushing the old display case, where the silver mic now rested silent, whole, and finally home. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Didn't need to. Its work, like mine, was done not in volume but in presence. Turns out, losing your voice can be the first step to finding your place again. Sometimes what feels like an ending is just your story changing tempo. We don't always get the toast we rehearsed, but if we're lucky, we still get heard. Have you ever found peace in a place you thought you'd outgrown? If this story echoes something in you, I'd love to hear your own chapter. Feel free to share it in the comments or follow along for more.